Hello everyone and welcome to a new top 10 list video, probably one of the few requested and anticipated topics to cover, and that is my 10 favorite albums from Prurient. This was not that much of an easy list to make and it took me quite a long time to finally make it, primarily because Prurient's catalog is extremely long, with lots of rare and hard to find releases and a wide variety of approaches with his music. Dominick Fernow has been a part of numerous different projects, from black metal groups to industrial techno stuff as Vatican Shadow, but what he's mostly known for is the moniker of Prurient, in which he has been making lots of different releases for more than 20 years at this point, and who I've seen live twice. His albums range from harsh noise to power electronics, dark ambient and drone, and the themes are mostly dark and grim. They can be misanthropic or about themes of death, conflicts, political extremism, and so on and so forth. One of the main things that has made Prurient stand out in comparison to many other artists in the field, especially at the time, is that certain works don't simply apply to the standard formula of raw, aggressive and intense power electronics and harsh noise. That is certainly the case with a few releases, but a couple of Prurient's albums and some of the most notable ones have more melodic elements that sound melancholic, devastating, and he is one of the few artists in the scene that have achieved, in my opinion, on blending aggression and intensity with emotionally powerful and captivating moments, making certain works feel depressing and harrowing, two words that I wouldn't think they would apply as descriptions to power electronics albums, or back in the day at least when I was getting into the genre. Certain albums that aim for this blend of sounds have managed to become some of the most important and significant releases in the entire genre, such as Frozen Niagara Falls, which for a lot of people was their introduction to Prurient, including myself, that went beyond the realms of what we would consider noise and power electronics, and also the more intense but equally mesmerizing compilation Cocaine Death. But obviously the list goes deeper, and there are so many hidden gems in his huge and varied catalog, which, truth be told, is also quite inconsistent, since there are quite a few albums that I don't like at all actually, but that's to be expected. This is just my opinion. If your favorite album is not on the list, maybe it's because I didn't like it as much to make it into my top 10, or I haven't heard of it, and also no EPs or compilations or live albums are going to be included. With that being said, here are my 10 favorite Prurient albums. Starting off at number 10 we have The History of Age, one of his most well-known works and possibly his first major release. Recorded back in 2000 and released in 2002, this album abandons some of the more experimental cut-up noise and sound collage elements from his early works and goes into a more straightforward and raw style of noise, an approach that would end up being the staple for many Prurient releases to come in the future. While there's not something particularly exceptional about it, there are lots of great elements to it, rich textures, intense harsh screams, and lots of different dynamics and volume variations, making the album constantly engaging. The abrupt and immediate loud transitions from one song to the next are superb on keeping the flow and grabbing your attention. It's considered one of the essentials in his catalog, and while I can see why, don't get into this expecting something groundbreaking. It's just really good for what it does, and truth be told, not a lot of later works have succeeded on capturing this level of intensity. At number 9 is Colonialist Nature and Misanthropy, probably one of the more rare and unknown albums on the list, especially considering how much of a quality album this is, and it's not talked about that much. A more lo-fi and muffled sound with this one, something that can be hit or miss with Prurient releases, but here it really adds to the raw nature of its sound. Colonialist Nature and Misanthropy is very synth-centered, which makes for some of my favorite approaches to Prurient's music, since it makes for great atmospheric and melancholic tracks alongside harsh production and vocals, which are more than present over here. Certain tracks end up going on a more rhythmic tone rather than just sad and mellow, but primarily the album centers around a specific formula, which can become a bit repetitive after a while. It ends up being more about which one of the ideas will stand out to you the most and grab your attention. One of those releases that I don't see being talked about enough, and it's not even one of his most challenging to get into. A strong recommendation, especially for those who are into Prurient already and haven't given this one a shot. On the other hand, at number 8 we have quite a polarizing release, and that is Arrowhead, which is unforgiving, torturous, and quite a challenging listen. This is certainly the case of an album from Prurient that is not going to be for everyone, and I do not recommend this as a starting point, because the high frequencies are so ear-piercing and non-stop for 30 minutes straight that it's hard to sit through, and that's why I love it. Maybe I'm a masochist, but this is so raw and unhinged that I can't help but be fascinated by it. It's like a huge fuck you to everyone, it's unforgiving, and to this day, returning to this is a challenge. For the most part, the 3 tracks over here are rich in texture with raw ear-piercing high frequencies from noise feedback, accompanied with free improvised sloppy drumming, which is really sparse, and very few vocal inflections that sound pretty harsh, on the track's sternum at least. Ribcage is more of like minimal free improvised harsh noise, and lungs ends things off with a continuous drum pattern and its more forgiving feedback sections. The sheer amount of intensity on display with Arrowhead makes for one of my favorite approaches of Prurient's music. I cannot stress enough that this is a hard listen. This is not an exaggeration. Arrowhead is a non-stop assault to the ears. It's so unapologetically brutal and relentless to the listener that I just end up being weirdly mesmerized by its harshness. At number 7 is the recent split with Masona, which works tremendously as a short 30-minute album by 2 titans in the scene, making a non-stop, relentless and unforgiving harsh release, and still manage to provide some of their greatest material to date. Even if it's what you would expect, both artists show on strong display their capabilities on making short and straightforward harsh noise tracks, with a ton of feedback, menacing vocals, and a feeling of intensity that never goes away. Even taking the Prurient tracks by themselves, they stand out really well on their own. There is also quite a variety to them. Some tracks are more chaotic with intense screams, others are more minimal and straightforward or have some spoken word type vocals. In just about 15 minutes of material, we can get a clear picture of some of the sickest and most torturous material Prurient has put out, especially in recent memory. At number 6 is Carte Blanche, the collaboration with Genocide Organ. This right here is a dream collab coming true. It was obvious that this was going to be great, and it's actually surprising how this hasn't happened sooner. In terms of death industrial and power electronics, this is exactly what you would expect from them. It actually feels more of like a product of its time, meaning an album that feels like it was actually made back in the 90s or 2000s. The war-themed power electronics has been overdone, it felt more relevant back in the day, and this is why I feel like an album like that would be more significant if it was made back when this type of sound and approach to power electronics was at its prime. But even if it's a predictable album that feels like we've heard it so many times in the past, it still achieves on being one of the greatest works you can find in the genre. This rich sampling accompanied with a dark and ominous atmosphere, monotone drone passages and a heavy dose of industrial metallic sounds make for one of the most consistently great works both artists have put out in their careers. The chemistry between those 2 titans is unmatched and is proven on full display in such a brilliant body of work, and even though it's predictable, it gets the job really well done for what it is. Number 5. It's Black Vase. Just like with Arrowhead, this is another album that is absolutely punishing and painful to listen to. The difference is that the torture over here lasts 72 minutes instead of 30. It's ruthless, it doesn't give you room to breathe, it's just unleashing air assault to the listener non-stop. The ear-piercing high frequencies over here are absolutely ridiculous, and it also contains drumming and manic harsh vocals just like Arrowhead, but here it's done much better in my opinion. Extremely aggressive feedback noise that doesn't hold back on being unhinged, raw and absolutely brutal. I love this album. Again, just like with Arrowhead, not for everyone. This might turn a lot of people off. It's one of the most challenging projects to sit through in its entirety. Not every track has the same amount of intensity, but for the most part, this is really brutal. There is something about such torturous sound that pushes the listener to its limits that fascinates me. Black Vase is one of the best albums that has tested my limits, and it has led to one of the most notable and most exceptional harsh noise and power electronics releases I can think of. At number 4 we get to some of the loudest and most unhinged territories with the album And Still Wanting. With an impressive blend of brutal walls of noise and a harrowing atmosphere, And Still Wanting contains what is undoubtedly some of the most captivating moments in Prurient's entire catalogue. Production is very crisp and solid, the vocals range from spoken word to harsh screams, who are some of his best and most chilling period, and it's also a really varied album ranging from industrial mechanical sounds on total terrorism and strict ideas to emotionally devastating monotone scenes and loops on Returning Truth, Last Stand and Incessant Rubber. A soul-crushing, intense, and depressing body of work, and Still Wanting is one of the prime examples of Prurient making an album that is harsh and sad at the same time. Truly one of his greatest accomplishments, and a style Dominick has proven he can execute with such intricacy, and in a few cases is the end product so fulfilling. At number 3 is Rose Pillar, the latest addition to this list, and I can't believe I didn't get into this album sooner, because Rose Pillar contains some of my favorite elements in all of Prurient's works, and not only that, but it also works amazingly over here, with some of the most emotionally impactful tracks Dominick has ever put out. Going more into death industrial and dark ambient territory, Rose Pillar gives a strong emphasis on bleak atmosphere, it sounds hopeless, Dominick delivers some of his most passionate and tortured vocal deliveries, and it's one of those releases that is not in your face loud noise. This is such a moving album, in its concept it's quite personal as well, it comes from a place of vulnerability, and there is such beauty to it. This is without a doubt one of the most essential works of Prurient in my opinion, and it's not one of the most talked about releases. A stellar hidden gem filled with dread, and definitely his best and most consistent works when it comes to ominous atmosphere. Tracks like Yellow Trumpets Glow in Darkness, Gardener of the Broken Arm, and Spins the World's Wheel Again have already been amongst my favorites Prurient has ever put out. At number 2 is going to be Unknown Rains. A year after his most well-known and well-received work, Frozen Niagara Falls, Dominick Fernow returns back with a sound that is more raw and indicative of his older output. More specifically, it feels like a sequel from an album that we're going to see at the number 1 spot. This album is 4 tracks outside of the 4-minute opener. They all go to the 10-minute mark, and this is some of the most captivating and melancholic stuff you're going to find in his catalog. The track Let Your Mind Free starts things with an explosion of noise and some very good sounding parts. The track Before Rain Becomes Snow focuses more on loud looped scenes that, alongside some good noise parts, evokes immaculately the sense of dread and hopelessness. In the Ruins of My Brother is the most laid-back track with monotone drone passages, an impressive death industrial aesthetic and a great use of its high-frequency parts. But the best is saved for last with Red Poppy Laughter. Undoubtedly one of the greatest noise tracks I've heard, period. Its melody has been stuck in my head. It is such a gorgeous piece, with so much pain and beauty behind it, intense noise parts and a powerful melodic loop that makes for the best Prurient track ever in my opinion. Definitely one of the most emotional and most important albums from Prurient, and an essential if you haven't heard it already, especially if you're a fan of the number 1 spot that we're going to discuss right now. So for me, the number 1 spot for my favorite Prurient album goes to Pleasure Ground. This album was responsible for changing in a big way my perspective on what noise and power electronics is capable of. Never before have I been so attached to a brutal release like this emotionally. This is an extraordinary album, and if it wasn't for Bad Seed, this would be my favorite power electronics release. Just like with Unknown Rains, this album contains 4 tracks, going for about 11 minutes each, and it's similar to combining loud melancholic synth loops with some intense noise. Military Road kicks things off right off the back with unwelcoming ear-piercing feedback noise, some intense blasts of noise, and some of the most brutal and torturous screams you'll ever gonna hear from Dominick. In its second phase, the track transitions to a more low-end monotone drone segment, and that's in my opinion the only part of the album that is not all that engaging. The loudness and distortion of every melody in Earthworks buried in secret helps to elevate this track on creating this feeling of uneasiness and discomfort. The vocals are once again insane, and it's so in your face the track becomes hauntingly beautiful. Outdoorsman Indestructible is the most toned down moment in the album, having a drone synth in its entirety, starting with a bizarre piano type loop and then having those great industrial like bells and ominous spoken word type vocals. But once again, the best is saved for last, with Apple Tree Victim, one of the best tracks of the 2000s for me. Like the second track, everything applies here as well. It incorporates loud and distorted minimal synth loops alongside horrific screams, and it's done even better over here. Masterful in its execution, dreadful, depressive, devastating, and one of a kind. Even Prurient himself hasn't managed to replicate the disturbing beauty of Apple Tree Victim that many times as the years would go by, despite this approach being a recurring theme with lots of his releases after Pleasure Ground. This album is influential, a striking combination of beauty and filth, immersive and just a superb dark journey from start to finish. And those are my 10 favorite albums of Prurient. Let me know your picks down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.